Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive legal puzzle, one that literally bridges centuries. We're looking at this fascinating intersection between classical Islamic law and modern political realities, based on a text drafted by Sheikh Dr. Muhammad Khair Haikal and translated by Islamic civilization. It poses a massive question. How do ancient laws apply when the empires that enforce them have completely vanished? We're going to look objectively at how classical legal scholars constructed frameworks intended to last forever and how modern analysts apply those exact frameworks today. It's an absolutely fascinating look into the mechanics of legal theory. So let's dive right in.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because here is the central mystery we're unpacking. What actually happens to a permanent contract when the state that originally signed it just disappears? Think about it. When you sign a modern contract, like, say, for your cell phone or an apartment lease, you expect it to last a year or two. And if that company dissolves, well, the agreement is basically void, or at least a total nightmare to enforce. But the source text we're analyzing today presents a wildly different legal reality. It examines a centuries-old contract established by historical Islamic states and asks how that contract functions today, in an era where the original state structure and the imam or caliph who traditionally oversee it are entirely absent. Now, to really get this, we've got to nail down our core subject, the Dhimmah. Historically, this refers to non-Muslim citizens living under an Islamic state with a specific covenant or treaty of protection. And we're not talking about some casual handshake deal here. This was a highly formal binding agreement of citizenship, granting rights, protections, and obligations within that society. Grasping this definition is absolutely crucial because the entire legal debate we're unpacking centers directly on this specific demographic and their historical relationship with the state.
So what we're looking for in this explainer is the hukm regarding these citizens today. And a hukm, just as a quick refresher, is a precise Islamic legal ruling or status based strictly on jurisprudence, right? We're not doing sociology or general history today. We're strictly looking at the technical legal ruling under classical Islamic law. The text poses this direct academic question. Given all the massive geopolitical shifts over the last century, what is the exact legal status of the descendants of the Dhimmah right now, today? To find that answer, we actually have to look at the mechanics of the original agreement.
Well, the answer to our modern legal gap actually lies in the Aqd, or the contract itself. The Aqd of the Dhimmah is that foundational agreement that established the relationship between the state and these citizens. And according to the text, understanding the DNA of this specific contract is the master key to resolving the whole issue. Honestly, it's kind of mind-blowing when you realize how meticulously this was engineered. It wasn't viewed as some temporary political treaty that expired when a leader's term ended. No, it was crafted with a very specific, long-term legal architecture built to withstand the test of time.
And early scholars really laid the groundwork here. The source points out that absolute foundational figures like Imam Ash-Shafi'i, in his famous book Al-Umm, clearly locked down the terminology. He actually used the expression Aqd al-Jizya, which refers to a historical tax paid for state protection, interchangeably with the Aqd ad-Dhimmah. So why does that matter for us? Because by standardizing this terminology way back in classical texts, early scholars ensured the legal parameters of this contract were universally understood across different eras of Islamic jurisprudence. It completely solidified the contract as a well-defined, unshakable legal institution, not just some fluid political policy.
And this brilliantly illustrates a really fascinating core dynamic. Just think about the actual people involved. The imams, the state deputies, the non-Muslim representatives who actually sat down to make the original contract. Naturally, they're mortal. They pass away. But the contract itself, the Dhimmah, was explicitly designed to outlive them. It's almost like a self-sustaining entity. It was never contingent on the lifespans of the leaders who penned it. It's a legal entity that exists totally independently of the mortals who brought it into existence.
To back up this idea of permanence, the source turns to the heavyweights of classical jurisprudence. Listen to this powerful quote from Al-Mawardi in his absolute classic, Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniya. He writes that once the imam establishes this contract based on the consent of the leaders, quote, it becomes binding upon all of them and the generations that follow them century after century. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Century after century. This wasn't just a fringe interpretation. This establishes a crystal clear classical consensus that permanence was a deliberate, engineered feature of the law.
And he definitely wasn't alone in this. The text seamlessly brings in another major scholar, Ibn al-Qayyim, from his book Ahkam al-Dhimmah. He describes the status super explicitly, stating that they have a permanent, forever Dhimmah. By stacking these quotes, the author of our source text is showing us an unbroken chain of legal reality. The Dhimmah isn't a lease you got to renew, it's a permanent, forever status. So that begs the question. If the classical texts universally agree that the contract is permanent, how on earth does that theoretical forever map onto the chaotic reality of modern history?
Well, the text gives us a pretty clear logical chain to bridge the centuries. Step 1, the ancestors make the permanent contract with the imam of the time. Step 2, time passes, the geopolitical landscape totally shifts, and the enforcing Islamic State disappears. But step 3, and here's the fascinating part, because of those classical rulings of permanence, we arrive at this amazing conclusion. The modern descendants fully inherit the contract. The logic argues that the disappearance of the enforcer does not equal the nullification of the contract. The inheritance of the legal status totally bypasses the vacuum of the state.
You can really visualize the massive structural shift here. Back in the day, the Islamic State and the Imam were present, functioning exactly as originally designed. Fast forward to today, and that entire political scaffolding is completely absent. Now, for a lot of legal frameworks, removing the state would instantly collapse the law. But the underlying legal framework of the Dhimmah is being put to the ultimate test here. And according to the source material, the pure jurisprudence actually holds strong, even when the original political structure has been completely stripped away.
So the crucial point is, how does this all culminate in Dr. Muhammad Khair Heikel's modern resolution? His text concludes that non-Muslim citizens in Islamic lands today are the direct descendants of those original contractors. Because the contract is inherently permanent, they still enjoy the exact same status of Ahlud Dhimmah. And furthermore, the ahkam, the rulings related to them, remain absolutely identical to those of their forefathers. The complete absence of the state today doesn't invalidate a single clause of the status they inherited.
When you step back, the main takeaway from this explainer is just the sheer, staggering durability of this specific Islamic legal ruling. The contract of Dhimmah applies not only to those living at the time of contraction, but to all generations that follow, forever. Regardless of modern political landscapes, regardless of the rise and fall of entire empires, the jurisprudence dictates that the legal relationship remains fundamentally unbroken. It's a really incredible look at a legal system that prioritizes the permanence of its covenants over the transient nature of human governments.
Which brings us to our final thought. Exploring a text like this really reveals just how deeply historical covenants run, and it leaves us with a pretty provocative question. How do ancient legal frameworks continue to shape modern identities and concepts of citizenship today? Even when the original states have completely faded into history, the legal DNA they created often survives, unseen, quietly continuing to influence the status and relationships of millions of people right now in the modern era. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the structures of our modern world.